So Unknown Fields is a nomadic design studio, and we venture out on expeditions into the shadows cast by the contemporary city to uncover the alternative worlds, the alien landscapes, the industrial ecologies, and the precarious wilderness set in motion by the powerful push and pull of the world's desires. To the dislocated landscapes we survey, the iconic and the ignored, the excavated and the irradiated are connected to our everyday lives in surprising and complicated ways. They are embedded in the global systems that form a vast network of elusive tendrils, twisting thread-like over everything around us, crisscrossing the planet, connecting the mundane to the extraordinary. And Unknown Fields makes provocative objects and films from these expeditions, exploring the dispersed narratives that coalesce to form a contemporary city. Our material things set in motion a vast planetary scale infrastructure, and they carve holes like canyons, they move mountains, they remake our world from the scale of the pixel to the scale of the planet. And our city casts shadows that stretch far and wide. And we tell tales from this dark side of the city. Our stories tonight will form a notional road trip through a reimagined city that stretches across the entirety of the earth. We create portraits of a place that sits between documentary and fiction, a city of fragments, of drone footage and hidden camera investigations, of interviews and speculative narratives, of toxic objects, reimagined landscapes, and distributed matter from distant sites. The dark side of the city is a collection of stories from the constellation of elsewheres that are conjured into being by the city's wants and needs, fears and dreams. Across the last 9 years, Unknown Fields have undertaken 14 expeditions through the distributed territories that lie behind the scenes of the city. We traveled aboard a cargo ship, following the trail of our electronics through the South China Seas, the shipping ports, factory floors, and rare earth excavations of China. We've traveled on a dust-blown road trip through the gold and aluminium mines of outback Australia, through the irradiated wilderness of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, to the precarious wilderness in the Wild West gemstone mines of Madagascar, through the lithium fields and charged landscapes of Bolivia and Chile, to the climate change landscapes of far north Alaska, to all the sites on the edges of the world where our technologies begin and end their lives. So these stories construct a notional journey from the point of sale to the hole in the ground, a journey stitched together using footage from some of the places that we've visited over the years. So tonight, I'm going to narrate a series of 5 stories. A series of stories which connect landscapes around the world to the contents in everyone in this room's pocket. Because what I want to talk about is this idea that our cities are extraordinary constellations of products, goods, and technologies. From the smallest and most inconsequential of objects to the most intricate and complex, these material things set in motion a vast planetary scale infrastructure. Our cities cast shadows that stretch far and wide. And here we start in a world of bytes and bitcoins, cyberspace and clouds, where 90% of the world's cargo still travels to us by sea. It's not beamed or teleported or conjured into existence along strings of fiber optics, but rather it's dragged across the planet in these heaving steel megaships, gizzards full with glistening gadgets and gizmos from distant lands. The secret lives of objects spans across a notional factory floor that reaches from the high street pound shop all the way to the resource fields of the Far East. And we traveled to China and beyond, tracing the shadows of the world's desires across the China Seas and along supply chains and cargo routes, to explore the dispersed choreographies and atomized geographies that global sea trade brings into being. What we're seeing are the contours of our distributed city, stretched around the earth, from the hole in the ground to the high street shelf. And our journey through East Asia is marked a cross-section through this supply chain. From source to sea, we follow the roots of this and that, of bits and bobs and things. As we stare out across the sea, we're reminded that it's been 45 years since the Apollo moon landings, and some would have it that we're failing to build big anymore. But if you stand on the bridge of a container ship docked in a megaport in Korea, it's clear that that's no longer true at all. 55,000 ships make up the global container fleet. 3.6 million containers are in motion worldwide, and the surface of our planet's oceans, for centuries a space of mystery and myth, of expanse and desolation, have been rationalized. Once an enigmatic, awe-inspiring place, the sea had become a zone of efficiency, little more than another channel for the automated supply chain network. The captain of the ship that we're all traveling on tells us that years ago the sea used to be filled with phosphorescent algae that would glow when the waters were disturbed. As the captain says, we would leave this luminous trail behind us in the water as the motors churned up all the green algae. And toilets are flush with seawater on the ships, and you could turn the lights off in the bathroom and flush the toilet, and the whole room would glow in a strange and surreal neon green. But now nobody on the ships knows what even lies inside the containers anymore. The ship captain and the portside crane operator have been made obsolete, and they're just passengers in the machine, their bodies repurposed as a component in the landscape-scaled robot, stacking the containers ready for transport, bringing our goods all the way home. This ship is called the New Dream, they said. It's almost finished. They use guided GPS cranes to move large sections of ships in the assembly process. They then weld the sections together by hand, making these some of the largest handcrafted objects produced in human history. And every welder signs his welds, so if there's a flaw, they can trace it back to who did it. Every component on the ship has the signatures of those who made it hidden under the paint. And before these objects set sail for our stores, they're brought and sold and traded in the vast halls of Yiwu International Trade City, a wholesale market the size of a city. The wholesale city consists of 80,000 shops, all identically sized 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter cubes that contain 10 million products stretched across 10 square kilometers. Sorry, we can't do that, the market trader says. My minimum order is 100,000. And every one of us owns something that's passed through the wholesale city. It's that little item that fills your desk drawer, the free pens a salesperson gives you, the toys your children break or forget. It's the hundreds of disposable products that fill 99-cent stores and gas stations. It's the stuff you buy on impulse because it's momentarily funny and cheap. And Christmas is also made in Yiwu. More than 60% of the world's Christmas decorations are produced here. That tree lighting up your lounge, those decorations hanging from the ceiling, that novelty stocking filler you brought your child, is all made in places like this. Shenzhen makes 90% of the world's electronics. And here we watch the human machines of the production line, all choreographed by efficiency algorithms, and their bodies are matched in speed to the conveyor belt that turns in front of them. These are the real robots of our cities of technology. But perhaps in this context, we can start to imagine redesigning our gadgets not based on how they slide into our pockets or feel in our hand, but perhaps for the networks they distribute and the economic resources they set in motion. What could the alternative design criteria be for a supply chain if it wasn't engineered around cheap labor costs and material availability? As we keep following the technology, we arrive at a village organized around metals and hardware components. The inhabitants of Guiyu collect the e-waste in their houses, and it surrounds their living, sleeping, and eating spaces. And here they're mining their domestic landscapes for lead, germanium, gallium, tin, nickel, and copper. And next to the pot of noodles simmers the acid bath, dissolving circuit wafers and flavoring metals and soup. And finally, we arrive at the shores of the 10-square-kilometer mine tailings waste lake that's filled with a cocktail of acids, heavy metals, carcinogens, and radioactive material that's roughly 3 times background radiation. China produces 95% of the world's rare earths, and 2/3 of this is produced in this town called Baotou. What we've just seen is some of the world's first footage of the toxic waste that sits beside the world's largest rare earth mineral refinery. And we take a selfie with our phones, and the material to polish its glass and run its software produces this very lake. And as we see ourselves mirrored in the screen, collapsed into this single luminous surface, is ourselves and this black earth. But in cities like this one, we brand our technologies with terms like the cloud, air, or featherweight. But in reality, they're violently wrenched from the earth. And as our personal electronics tend towards the invisible, they conjure in their shadows an undeniably visible grey mountain, a 1-kilometer deep pit, a 10-square-kilometer radioactive tailings lake, all landscapes that are a counterweight to the apparent immateriality of computing, communications, and electric energy. And as we collect this black sludge, we use it to make a set of vases that are made from the amount of toxic waste created in the production of 3 objects: an iPhone, a MacBook, and a cell from a Tesla electric car battery. It's a new material aesthetic for the technologies that are actually born of the earth. And with this potter, we create these 3 vases whose silhouette echo the highly valuable Ming Dynasty porcelain vases. Ming vases are particularly iconic objects of high value, as well as being artifacts of international trade. The Ming dynasty, a one-family global superpower, presided over an international network of connections, trade, and diplomacy. But these three rare earthenware vessels are the physical embodiment of a different kind of contemporary global supply chain network, a network that displaces Earth and weaves matter across the planet. And they represent the undesirable consequences of our material desires. And to begin, we've followed the unmaking of these objects of technology. We've reversed their journeys from the container ships and ports, through wholesalers and factory floors, all the way back to the banks of the barely liquid radioactive lake in Inner Mongolia that is continually pumped with the tailings from the rare earth refinery process. The unmaking of our technologies is the making of these vases, carefully crafted from their toxic byproducts. And we keep on traveling. In Treasured Island, Unknown Fields travels through Madagascar to catalogue the push and pull of economy and ecology. And we meet the illegal traders of the world's luxury brands. One of the planet's most precious ecological treasures is also home to one of its poorest nations. And here it raises difficult questions about the relationship between necessity and luxury. And hidden amidst political uncertainty, the island's fragile and unique ecology is being smuggled out illegally, boat by boat, and gem by gem. And rare tortoises leave in rucksacks, and forests are carved into million-dollar rosewood beds to be sold in China, and precious stones are shoveled from the earth and smuggled onto the stage in pop star bling. And as the beat drops and the stage lights strobe, a pop star flashes their designer bling for the camera in a flurry of choreographed dance moves. And another world away, in this hole in the ground in the Wild West mining town of Ilikaka, Madagascar, another choreography of bodies moves in rhythm to dig dirt by hand out of a gemstone mine. And the majority of the world's sapphires are pulled out of the ground by these human conveyor belts of Madagascar's gem fields. For such a remote island, it contains an extraordinary amount of high-value resources. Precious gems was deposited here by an ancient river that once flowed across Africa before a tectonic shift ripped it from the mainland to form the island of Madagascar. And the stones collected in pockets along the twists and turns of the riverbed, resting patiently beneath 20 meters of sand and this future boomtown of Ilikaka. We dig holes to try and find the river again, they said. These are the words of Mark Nouvera, one of the major players in present-day Ilikaka, one of the only Europeans in town. He moved here 18 years ago. He was chasing the stones, hunting his fortune. He is the anonymous reflected in every piece of jewelry you own. I like stones better than humans. I like stones better than money, he says. In 1999, he drove into Ilikaka to live in a tent and watch the place explode. When he first arrived here, there was only one building, and now the landscape is overrun with 100,000 miners. There is only one road in or out, and it's lined with gem stops and sweaty men with guns on their hip. I finance the pit, he says. Here in Ilikaka, the land is free. All you need to mine is a local arrangement with chiefs and elders. There's no government here. There's nothing. There's thousands of people, but it's the most lonely place in Madagascar. And this is the landscape produced from unregulated desires. If you want to mine with machines, you need a formal contract for fuel and maintenance. But to dig with people, you don't need anything except a bag of rice. Each worker gets $2 a day to work in the mines and 50 grams of rice. 1 cubic meter of earth equals 1 gram of gemstone. And here it's cheaper to pay 20 workers in rice than it is to buy and maintain mechanical mining equipment. And the 20 men of Mark's Swiss bank mine shovel dirt in perfect synchronization, each paid with rice, their bodies repurposed as machines. This mine took 12 years to dig by hand, he says. And we trace their movements like the early photographic studies of Frank Gilbraith. He was mapping the choreographies of the production line, looking to optimize every movement, constraining every motion with the elegance of a tuned engine. In Madagascar, the digger is a robot, just one component in the gemstone conveyor belt. 2,880 shovels per day, 5.76 tons. This is my hole, says one of the miners. I started digging 4 years ago. Every hole here was made by our hands. And if you're lucky, you find a good sapphire and you have a good life. With no luck, you die, or you grow old digging holes. And when we find a stone, we all go together to the Sri Lankans to sell it, he says, and we split the money. We don't know what happens to them or to the stones. We don't know how much money they sell them for, because the money never comes back. So everyone else with money in this town is Sri Lankan. The cultural relationship to sapphires runs deep in Sri Lanka. Embedded within traditional Sri Lankan sapphires, they sell at much higher prices than Madagascan stones. If rough, unpolished stones can be smuggled out of the country and sent back to Sri Lanka, then they can be refined and sold on at an extraordinary markup. At 6 p.m., the single street town comes alive as miners return from the field for a treacherous 2-hour negotiation. They crowd around the tiny grilled windows that line the street, and they watch as Sri Lankans sort through their finds. The street is watched with the focus light of 100 tiny gem torches shining through the stones, looking for imperfections and inclusions, anything to drop the price.
And that takes a high price in market.
Yeah, maybe 1 carat or 1 lakh.
Yeah. 1 lakh.
Yeah, $1,000 like that.
You have a big smile on your face.
Yeah.
We find ways to send rough stones out of the country, they say. If I find a good stone, I fly it back to Switzerland to get a certificate on which I can nominate the origin of the stones. I make much more money if I say I got it from Sri Lanka, Mark says. And we imagine planes full of buyers lifting off from this treasured island, their shoes, their jacket lining, full of shimmering, deep blue jewels. We are not a city. We have no name, no mayor, no bank, no map, Mark says. A hidden black market supply chain connects these two choreographies, from the lawless mine sites to the jewelry stores and hip-hop music videos and celebrity red carpets across the ocean. Material production and cultural production have never really been separate at all. So Unknown Fields have used the amount of rice that the human conveyor belt consumes in a day to manufacture a precious stone that embodies the systems through which these worlds are intimately and profoundly connected. The red Madagascan rice that's grown endemically on this treasured island, the staple food of the miners, has been collected locally and shipped to gem specialists in this lab for carbon analysis. So by subjecting the rice to extreme heat and pressure in the laboratory, Unknown Fields has formed and shaped a single synthetic stone encoded with the sum of the human conveyor belt's labor. And after manufacture, the gemstone has been sent to London to be set into a gold tooth, ready for that $1 million smile and the outrageous lyric.
There's a monsoon that never ends. A cold white tiger woke us from a slumber.
So from kilojoules to carrots to the nightclub. In this glare of the cheeky gold grin, we see the cost of luxury, the beauty of a daily allowance of rice, and of 20 men shoveling at the bottom of a hole.
Nice. Show that stone on. Danny, we are going to do what we just suggested. 1 second.
The diamond glistens in the light, and mirrored in the facets of the rice diamond we see ourselves and the hole in the ground from which it came. So to chronicle the creation stories of the city, Unknown Fields heads on a dust-blown road trip across Australia into the vast and mysterious interior of this remote island continent in search for its ancient tribal hinterlands and its immense techno-landscapes. So beneath the Southern Cross, these machines harvest the earth for the precious ingredients of our daily lives. And we stalk mechanical beasts the size of buildings. And we explore excavations the size of a city. So here in the Never Never are the resource territories of the city, a land of rich geology, endless horizons, and mining pits so large that they generate their own weather systems. Towering mountains of tailings, remade landforms, terraced valleys, and artificial lakes all take shape from this distributed ground. So Unknown Fields have traveled 1 kilometer beneath the surface of the earth in search of gold to survey and laser scan the technological incisions that release it from the ground. And we follow tunnels winding below Australia's red crust and stand at the base of megapits that are cut through the narrative landscape of the Dreamtime, the creation mythology of Aboriginal Australians. And territories once mapped into surfaces of Aboriginal dot paintings are now depicted on screen in these digital point clouds of geology survey scans. And we trace a constellation of gold objects that are now scattered across the earth. And we see their origins in the mine pits and tunnels and the ore bodies in the deep below. Roughly 0.034 grams of gold, grams of this very landscape, is locked away in each of our mobile phones, charged and quietly vibrating. We all carry a little piece of Australia in our pockets. And our city of gold casts a long shadow across this earth. Here lies the silent twin, the void, where a landform once was, where an ancient landscape once was that is now scattered and redistributed and remade into bullion, into a grandmother's wing, into a gangster's tooth, into electrical connections, into a gold-plated revolver, into a haul of Roman coins in a museum, or the gold flakes in the bottom of a shot glass. From the ground comes a catalogue of gold objects. Every object leaves a trace, and the fluctuations of the gold price on the market sends ripples through this earth. And the territories of Australia become atomized into a constellation of glistening things scattered around the world. The dust of Australia blows gold. And forged from this ancient supercontinent, the ground of Western Australia is formed from some of the oldest rocks on the planet. And Aboriginal Dreamtime narratives speak of a time when the ground was soft, and creation beings shaped mountains and rivers, when a rainbow serpent slinked across the ground to create a river, and a wild dog came to rest to form a mountain. And now, as the lights of the city wash out the sky, the songlines are walked by these ancestral spirits, but they're sung anew with the tracks laid down by the beasts of the mining industry. And here, explosive diggers and drills have replaced the slow erosion of rivers and winds, and new stories are beginning to be told. And the dreaming landscape that embodies the creation stories of Aboriginal Australians is overlaid with a vast infrastructure of resource speculation and financial fiction. Geological survey planes track back and forth, laser scanning the earth, searching for topographic anomalies that indicate pockets of undiscovered minerals in the ground. And the millions of points created by these scans are now examined to determine territories for core sampling. And these in turn give form to subterranean outcrops, features and landmarks, bands and shards of material riches, like an X-ray underneath the dry red dirt. And Aboriginal native title rights apply to the surface of the earth, but they exclude the valuable subsurface materials which belong to the state and to the government. And no one yet is singing the creation stories of the ore bodies below the ground. They are voids in waiting, fragments of a country destined to be taken away ship by ship. And traditional dot paintings of Dreamtime stories has often been used to support land rights claims. But now the dots of the point cloud data force a different type of claim on the landscape. The technologies with which this ground is surveyed, depicted, and recorded also have become the means through which we claim ownership over it. So constructed from 3D laser scans, underground mine models, and aerial survey data, these point cloud paintings on the screen take us on a subterranean journey. It's a worm's eye view of the ore bodies, open pits and tunnel excavations of the gold mines of Western Australia And these images hope to recontextualize the data from economic assessments of these landscapes to within a narrative of an alternative cultural reading. Underneath all of our feet lies a landscape of glistening minerals laden in the earth and dormant nuggets destined to take the form of the city's desires. This story tonight is a story about material valued above all others, but there exists a parallel story about the value of this landscape untouched and of indigenous lands. One of the principal uses of gold is as an investment instrument. It's a proxy for accumulated wealth. It's a high-stakes version of the wad of cash that we might have stored under the mattress. Much of the gold is extracted from this ancient ground and is done so purely so it can be quantified and weighed. It's then shipped across the world from one hole in the ground to another and stored below the surface in a vault, like the HSBC Reserve or the Federal Reserve in the United States. And there it remains just to be traded virtually. The gold price is a culturally constructed value, a financial fiction embodied in the block of material from which it's been wrung like blood from a stone, 2 grams from a ton of earth on average. And in these cool calculations of the digital mine model, the shape of the excavation changes as the variable gold price is entered into the software. And as the gold price rises, it becomes more economical to mine areas of lower gold ore concentration. And this model reveals the various grades of a single gold ore body in grams per ton. And as the price drops, the virtual mine shrinks and the software focused around deposits of richer ore. So one cut at a time, the fluctuations of the gold price are being etched into the ground of Western Australia, forging these deep underground caverns and open pit excavations the scale of the Grand Canyon. And that steamy black void in which Unknown Fields once stood is a live graph that's actually shaped by the frequency of electronic trades in London and New York. And from such distances, we can so dramatically affect a landscape that doesn't belong to us. To explore this story, Unknown Fields have built a domestic mining machine with a data connection to the precious metals market. It's a numbers game that carves mountains across the other side of the world, but we've brought it home to live with us in more familiar territories. Here it's live linked to the gold price as it trades. It's tracking its percentage rise and fall, and the miner carves into the everyday. The abstractions of buying and selling play out in our comfortable, mundane excavating of our domestic landscapes. And the financial foundations of the lives we lead and the things we own are propped up on investment commodities and the fluctuating values that are assigned to them. And this abstract stream of numbers and the distant landscapes they carve are both obscure alien realms. But now you sit at your kitchen table and our mining machine mines, the price rises, your world is excavated as you sip your cup of coffee and you read the morning papers. It mines as you sleep, as you take a bath, as you watch TV. What was once out of sight, lost to distance, just a sacrificial territory in your place we will never know, is now brought home to screech and drill in the cities and spaces we all know. The landscape of Australia is both everywhere and nowhere. And here in the red ochre of the Never Never we are carving our desires into the archaeological record. And now to locate the environmental forecasts and the data landscapes of Unknown Fields City, the studio travels to Alaska's far north to visit a territory that sits in the collective imagination as one of the last remaining wildernesses on the planet. Here, climate change is not something of the future, but it's a phenomenon unfolding in real time. Here, while whale migration patterns are shifting, and coastlines are disappearing, and the ice is melting, and Unknown Fields spends the winter solstice with the climate scientists from around the world who are camped out in the most northern cities on the planet, collecting data that's fed into climate modeling supercomputers and shaping environmental policies further south. What we're hearing now is the sound of the supercomputer, the white noise of millions of calculations per second. From the oracles and augurs of the ancient to the predictive modeling of modern digital prophets, both wise men and charlatans have claimed to see into the future. Cultures differ in their concept of time and their attitudes towards the future. Alaskan Inuit, informed by ancestral memories of their environment and its patterns, embrace the uncertainties of the future with a deep belief in their own abilities to adapt. Meanwhile, the world's environmental scientists attempt to assemble their observations into climate models in order to predict the future as precisely as possible. So caught between improvisation and premeditation, these cultural landscapes will define the future of the North and in turn our cities beyond. And here we peer into the supercomputer to find a set of surreal landscapes that sit between tradition and technology, between the real and the imagined, the present and the future. These are landscapes generated by and narrated by Alaskan authors, and they're constructed from climate data and modeling software of supercomputer scientists. And against these images run panoramas of the supercomputer infrastructure that simulates them and the doomsday statistics that are shouted out to us every day. Traditional data visualizations and guilt-laden headlines are no longer sufficient strategies to encourage the cultural shift required. Unknown Fields have cracked open the black box to pull out the environments that the supercomputer is predicting and to imbue them with new narratives. The indigenous poetry is an alternative mythology for an ever-melting landscape of fear and hope. These are panoramas that are dramatizations of data, portraits of a world that we have already lost or one we are yet to find. The following are poems written by native Alaskan writer Priscilla Hensley of these landscapes we created. Gentle being, how do you float across the ice to me? You somehow know my heart's become overheated, that I churn my own friction burning me up. I can only stand here on the edge again and look, wait, yearn. Fog rises. Strong being, you leap from pan to pan, something a child could do if we'd ever let one anymore. Somehow you know I need your courage. You burst through the mist over and over again. I try to breathe you in. The pink clouds we'd just seen floating above the ice field is a particle simulation that's been produced from a global carbon emissions dataset. In the morning, there came a new bird's call. It seemed louder than all others, either because it stood out or because the other birds were shocked into near silence. What is it saying? Where is it from? And are there others on the way? The texturing on that iceberg is generated from the translation of a projected global temperature rise and set into a three-dimensional noise map. It will be the water rising, not just against the measure of shorelines and house posts, but as a needed, necessary thing. Fear fluttering in the parched mouths. The journey will be long, it will seem novel and risky, it may be. And the waveforms of a soundscape generated by running a Fairbanks supercomputer data tape through a reel-to-reel player have been used to form this layer of cirrus clouds above the churning ocean.
All right, welcome everyone to...
And so much
the announcement
is
of
gone,
Tesla Energy.
gone.
All right.
And Unknown Fields now chronicle this electric landscape, investigating the infrastructures that serve as energy conduits, translating matter from a luminous language and from a hole in the ground to the glow of our phones. We trace a wild journey of electrons from the radiant gizmos of our technology deep into landscapes far away. This fiction is an account of a new creation story for our energy. From the Big Bang to the battery, from the birth of lithium at the beginning of the universe to the low power warning that's flashing on all of our screens. We power our future with the breast milk of volcanoes. And here we start in the beginning of the beginning, where seconds from 13.8 billion years ago, the creation story of lithium begins in a big bang. It was there at the dawn of time alongside helium and hydrogen, just one of only 3 elements able to claim their ultimate origin in that hot, dense, primordial gas. Light is the only detectable record that is left of the Big Bang. And in many ways, it's the ghost of lithium creation. And here at 5 kilometers above sea level on the Chagnator Plateau is the Chilean Atacama Desert, and the landscape has eyes. 66 white pupils that turn in unison to search the thin air of these dark skies. Here, the astrophysicists of the Atacama's Large Millimeter Array are focused skyward, traveling deep through the dark interstellar clouds of the coldest, oldest parts of the universe. But in this same landscape, another community of nomadic shepherds, the indigenous Lakantai people, used their own land and trekked across the grounds where the antennas now stand. On this plateau, all eyes have been on the shadows in the sky, silhouetted against the light of the Milky Way and the dark clouds that Alma now observe through the same shadow constellations of indigenous mythology. And dancing within a swathe of interstellar clouds that forge lithium is the Yakana, the llama, her baby, and her shepherd. These creatures have trampled lithium, the lightest of metals from the beginning of time, to the crust of the earth. And 4.6 billion years ago, as the Yakana drank from the sky, the wreckage of an exploding supernova began to condense into our planet. And in this vast cloud of swirling cosmic matter, gravity, and violent collapse, the sphere of the Earth was formed, and embedded within its surface was traces of lithium. Lithium comprises 7 parts per million of the Earth's crust, locked in this ground, waiting for release. We watch over this electric Earth. And 10,000 years ago, a series of lakes formed high on the Andes Plateau, where Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, the 3 countries of the lithium triangle, now meet. And here lies the largest salt lake on the planet, containing at least 50% of the world's lithium resources. And this salt lake was once a vast plain where the Incans giants lived. Among them was a beautiful mountain called Tunupu. She chose to marry Cuzco, a strange young man and a son called Callicatan, who was soon born of their union. And while away on one of his trade journeys, he became infatuated with a pretty young woman, and they ran off together, never to return. The gods, who were tired of these giants' lies, secrecy, and betrayal, decided to punish them and petrified them all as mountains. And Tunupu began to cry, a volcano spewing ash and rock from the depths of the planet, rich in light elements like magnesium, potassium, boron, and lithium. And while the tears rolled down her cheeks, her breasts began to lose the milk that her son had not suckled. And millennia of meltwater from the snow-capped peaks of her mountains seeped down through her rocky sides, leaching minerals into the lake below. As the giant volcanoes, Tunupu's tears ran into subterranean brine, and her milk crystallized as this crusty salt skin that now stretches endlessly across the plateau. This charged landscape, this electric earth, remote and unforgiving, is now quantified for its energy potential. Cities, industries, and infrastructure will feed at the shores of this ancient lake, playing out our electric future. The future of green energy is made up from the tears and milk of Tunupu, the mother volcano. It was a little over 20 years ago that lithium erupted again in the Salar de Uyuni. A Belgian construction company found the ground too soft for construction, but inadvertently had cracked open the earth to reveal the lithium-rich brine below. 100 million tons of Tunupu's forgotten tears are now estimated to be trapped here. Without the knowledge and assistance of foreign companies, it's taken over 20 years, but now Bolivia is ready, and the Salar is soon to be industrialized. This natural wonder has become the most lucrative of investments and has cast Bolivia as the Saudi Arabia of Elon Musk's electric age. And you cannot see it on the desperately flat horizon or access it by any public road. The mystery of this landscape is protected by its isolation. So lithium development is not mining through extraction, but through evaporation. And here we see this tessellated ocean of evaporation ponds, where each shift in hue signals a rising concentration of lithium salts. And the shores of the Metal Sea begin at pond number 15, 0.2% lithium, the least concentrated, azure blue with a sodium chloride beach. Each month the ponds are drained and transferred to the next in line. Each month the color changes and the lithium gets richer. Across 15 months the sea migrates through the holding ponds of the Salar until it reaches the deep coffee waters of pond number 1, 6% lithium sulfate. What is left behind is massive quantities of table salt, which is piled up beside the lithium ocean, and gradually a new mountain grows. What will we call her? This salt crystal volcano, a totem for a sacrificial sea, evaporating to keep the screens glowing and all the wheels turning. The sea has been slowly evolving across billions of years and is now ready to leave the land of giants forever, sucked up by a convoy of thirsty 18-wheelers and driven off the Salar to the lithium carbonate factory to be processed into batteries. The creation story of a battery is soon becoming the creation story of a nation. And as it gently vibrates across the earth, the iPhone 6 can travel 14 hours on its 1810 milliamp lithium polymer battery before it comes to rest. It feels warm to the touch, and we are told stories about its lightness and its slim lines. Reflected in its pristine, polished glass is the mirrored expanse of the crystal white salt lake from which it has been wrenched. Nearly 9 billion mobile phones in the world are powered by lithium-ion batteries. 5 to 10 grams of Tunupu's tears and breast milk is contained in every iPhone. In ludicrous mode, the 7,000 lithium, nickel, cobalt, aluminium oxide cells of the 900 kilowatt-hour battery pack that sits in the belly of a newborn Tesla P90D delivers enough power to accelerate from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 2.8 seconds. 20 to 30 kilograms of lithium at the core of each electric car. As this glistening beast shrieks down the tarmac, it sends ripples across the turquoise pools. It is a hunter stalking the electric future. And 3 electrons orbit the lithium nucleus. Our story began with the travels of stars, and it ends with these tiny revolving planets just waiting for a charge. Unknown Fields have built a new glass battery. It's a mythic love story that trickles charges to a phone. While the world does its best to ignore that technology is formed from the earth, with its marketing campaigns of ephemeral clouds and the relentless push to the smallest and the lightest, this object embodies the story of the landscape in which it was made. A mass of alternating aluminium and graphite, or the anode and cathode, is submerged in a lithium brine electrolyte collected from Bolivia's electric Salar de Uyuni, and it creates a slow reaction. The drip charge of a weeping volcano. The creation myth of this landscape is told again and again as the electrons flow. And the flash of the Big Bang ends in the flash of electrons, and our future is powered by the breast milk of volcanoes. And as we come to the end of our tour, we see a camera flash, a model pouts, a sharp cheekbone and a whip of a hip catches the eye on the catwalk. And we see fast fashion's rolling tide dump mountains of cheap clothing onto the high street shores. Objects of desire, worn for one wild night and destined to be discarded. Our second skin, our identity statement, our comfort and costume. It reveals and camouflages, empowers and imprisons. And finally, we pick at a loose thread on the garment that all of us in this room are wearing, and we unravel it across continents, from wardrobe to warehouse, from factory to field, in search of the landscapes behind our runway dreams and our street blue jeans. Before we wear them, our clothes make journeys of tens of thousands of miles in their process of production. Textiles are the most globalized industry on the planet. T-shirt cities and textile valleys span from field to factory and harvest vast cotton crops and silkworm cocoons and draw yarn across deafening shuttles as rows and rows of automated looms weave the fashion fads of a distant world. And here iconic rivers run with the colors of the season, as chemicals used in their dye processes are dumped untreated to poison the land along their rainbow banks. Unknown Fields reveal the unseen effects of the fast fashion supply chain, following it through the cotton fields, through the textile mills, the dye yards, the garment factories, and the shipping ports of India and Bangladesh. And the byproduct of this pace and scale of production is the destruction of the very thing that brought the industry to Southeast Asia originally. Here on our tour through the dark side of the city, we meet the last generation of master weavers, a group whose skills will now die with them. And the apprentices they would once train now man the rumbling mechanized looms of global fashion, raw cotton plugging their ears, deaf to the din of the world around them. And we visit the last real gold thread maker, who's an alchemist, lovingly tweaking the machine his grandfather made for him, resisting the move to synthetic, cheap and fake yarns used by all the other companies around him. And as we span from fashion victim to victims of fashion, Unknown Fields have developed a film and a collaborative textile to reveal the way traditional craftspeople in the textile industry are being put out of work by the disposable nature of fast fashion. Working collaboratively with the last gold thread maker and one of the last true master weavers in Varanasi, traditional craft expertise is drawn and out and extended to create a narrative fabric, artwork, and film. And audio from a series of interviews with these endangered craftspeople, and the sound of their looms is translated into a binary pattern and woven into the cloth. The textile becomes an archive, encoded with the skills of a dying craft and woven with the same hands it's trying to remember. So to make the thread for the textile, Unknown Fields follows the container ships that bring fast fashion to our shores all the way to their death, where after their short 25-year lifespan, they return to India and Bangladesh to be broken up and salvaged in the shipbreaking yards. And we collected the fragments of this raw steel from the Bangladeshi shores, cut from the rusting carcasses of the dead ships to form the core of the gold thread. It's a textile archive born from the skeletons of the industry that brought it into being. And the gold cloth now covers a young Indian textile worker who's walking slowly on a sacred procession. She's traveling from her home village amongst the cotton fields to the huge mills and factories of the vast textile industry supply chain where she works. And her global journey suggests the walk along the fashion catwalk and the path our disposable fashion takes in its global production, and the path that many women like her have taken as they've moved from village to the factories of this city. And as she walks, she's gradually wrapped in the glistening gold textile as it bears witness to a series of transformations like weaving, dyeing, sewing, and pressing. And the film is set to the rhythms of the hand loom, fast fashion slowed down to a pace of production that the planet can sustain. And her journey ends as she's completely cocooned, standing at the edge of the huge container port amongst the mega container ships that will soon export her to the West. For Unraveled, we have delved into the dressing up box, into the wild, whimsical, weird, and wicked world of fashion, to look deep beyond what is reflected in the shimmering, gilded mirror. In the dark side of the city, we look behind the parties and the cash registers, behind the textile industry that's remaking the world, between the scale of the stitch and the planetary supply chain. In glittering gold, Unknown Fields weave new connections and reimagine the relationship between consumption and production. Thanks.